As hospitals and health systems continue driving toward their pursuit of the quadruple aim, the question of financial viability and clinical benefit continues to be top of mind for hospital administrators. Every important decision hospital executives make typically comes after looking at the data and how to affect change. My name is Molly Gamble, and I will be your moderator for this session, What's in it for me? The clinical and financial viability of robotic-assisted surgery. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to start with some tips to participate in this session. Please use the Q&A box to enter your questions for speakers. We will address your questions throughout the session, and at the conclusion of the presentation, we will discuss your questions with the speakers. To engage with your fellow attendees, please use the group chat feature. And finally, if you experience any technical issues, please email support@mig.cc for assistance. Before we dive into our discussion to explore how accomplished leaders developed a business plan when initially investing in robotics, what the pull-through looked like, and how to demonstrate ROI to the board, let's learn more about each of our panelists. Kristen, can you introduce yourself to start?
Absolutely. Thanks, Molly. My name is Kristen O'Connor. I'm market president with USPI, covering our Tennessee, Alabama, Virginia, and North Carolina markets. I've been working very closely with Intuitive on the outpatient robotic front. We're actually opening our third outpatient robotic program together here in the coming months. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for being here, Kristen. Alan, let's turn to you.
Thank you, Molly. I'm Alan Goldsmith. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the North Broward Health District, which is a 5-hospital system down in Broward County. I'm looking forward to this panel, and thank you very much.
Likewise, Alan. Thanks for joining us. And Jeff?
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, I'm Jeff Jackson. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for St. Joseph's Hospital, part of the Dignity Health System here in Phoenix.
All right, thank you, Jeff. And finally, Jim.
Hello there, Molly, thanks, and it's a privilege to be on here with the rest of the panel, and I'm excited to hear all of your testimonials. So I'm Jim Blackwell. I'm functioning as the CEO at Clara Barton Hospital, which is right in the middle of the state of Kansas. For 15 years prior to that, I served as a Chief Financial Officer. For the last 6, I've been the CEO. Nice to be here. Thanks, Molly.
Thank you, Jim. And Jim, I'm going to stay with you for my first question. The 4 of you, as we just heard, represent different types of institutions. So it would be great to hear different perspectives about what went into building a business plan for each of you when you initially made the investment in robotics. Jim, can you start us off by sharing some metrics that you found to be really key to measuring the success, and who was involved with that planning process?
Well, thank you. And it was a really exciting time for us at the initial onset. We've been watching the robotic program develop over the years. We have a very robust general surgery program. And let me start off with, to give some background, our hospital is a 23-bed critical access hospital, again, with a very strong outpatient volume. So in our community, we're surrounded by other small towns. It's predominantly a farming community with agriculture and business that really drive it. So other small towns that are close to us and other tertiary care centers that are at least within an hour's drive for us. So what we discovered over the years is that there were 3 robotic platforms that were within an hour kind of surrounding our community. And we had seen the degradation of surgical services of our organization over the years, specifically in urology and OB-GYN type procedures that went to the robotic platforms that quickly become kind of the standard of care for those types of procedures. And we lost our footing on that type of market share. So the metrics that really went into it for us were the procedures that are being done here now for general surgery, we don't want done there. And we wanted to reserve that and give our community the opportunity to have those services done here locally. As far as the individuals that were involved with that, our board of directors, our general surgery, our OR team were highly skilled and ready to go with this. And that was the other key measure of success for us, is having trained clinicians in here that were excited about and 100% on board, ready to go with that. But that was the main goal for us, was market retention and competition.
Jeff, your Dignity St. Joe's is in a different market from what Jim just described. What were some metrics that were really determining factors in your decision to invest?
Well, some of the similar things. This is a very competitive market. Plus, St. Joe's is an academic medical center, so we were kind of, I don't want to say forced, but really we needed to stay up with technology because I think our students expected that. Plus, just to compete in this market, if we didn't offer this technology, the cases would move down the street, right? So we're surrounded by other large hospitals, many of them academic in nature. So it's really just, to stay in the game, we needed this technology.
Kristen, is there anything you would add on behalf of USPI?
Well, certainly representing the outpatient space, I think we take just necessarily a different lens when we're evaluating the program overall. I would say it's consistent with a very back to basics approach. So like any new service line we would be embarking upon, running the pro forma, understanding what the upside looks like, what the break-even point looks like. Those I would really consider just the critical components in even considering a program. And here, again, me personally, working with my third launch of an in-network outpatient robotics option, involving the key stakeholders, which I would include as the physicians, our inpatient health system partners where appropriate, our anesthesiologists, and then of course our staff, so that we're continuing to deliver upon, again, that back to basics approach of the outpatient surgical environment being efficient, effective, high efficiency and room turnover, getting into a program that makes sense up front. You have to have those stakeholders involved in those critical assumptions as you're evaluating what that program can look like, both clinically and economically.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Before we move on, Alan, let me check in with you and see if there's anything you'd like to add to your co-panelist remarks so far.
Well, one of the reasons why I love doing these panels so much is that we have people from all over the country, but healthcare really, although it's complex, sometimes it's really just very simple. And we all have sort of the same process of how we go through things. So we did very similar to what Jim did from a financial perspective. We did what Jeff did, and then listen to Kristen from the outpatient perspective. Although we have a lot of our robotics in the inpatient world, we did a lot of the same things on the outpatient world. So if I was giving advice to people that are listening to this, is just listen, make a multidisciplinary team approach, listen to your stakeholders and what they want, listen to the community, and really bring the best technology and state-of-the-art equipment to the community you serve. And everything will fall into place. The financials will fall into place. The people will fall into place. And if you come from that part, I think that you'll be able to be very successful in any strategy you do, but specifically in the robotic strategy.
Well, we're talking about clinical and financial viability today. And Jeff, let me turn to you as CFO. You represent a big part of this Venn diagram. How has value-based care impacted your institution? And have you found that robotic service line is helping you to achieve your strategic initiative there?
Sure. Yeah. So, Medicare has a multitude of programs you can participate in. But what we're seeing, in this market is even a lot of our commercial plans are building in metrics related to quality, length of stay, throughput, readmissions. So when we start, layering in that data into our analysis and looking at robotic surgeries compared to laparoscopic or open, it's definitely favorable. We definitely see improvements in length of stay. Some of the quality metrics clearly are better doing it robotically. So we can leverage those commercial contracts to their fullest by using the robotic program where appropriate.
And Jim, you're in a unique position too at a critical access hospital. Can you describe how you quantify the impact to your hospital and the community?
There's several methods that go about quantification with that. And, obviously you have the financial aspects. And for us, it is a unique position as a critical access hospital in the operating room. You have a certain financial class mix. And if your Medicare share is set for that, it helps out. Your different payers, there's way that they reimburse you, and you have increased incentive if you can convert those open procedures back to laparoscopic in this case. You have some of that. But quantification for us, also kind of like Jeff said, kind of went down to, the lower length of stay. That was a huge win were some of the metrics for us that we saw that was a key indicator for us. So again, like I was saying earlier, we're in the middle of a farming community. So if you have a bunch of your community members that are wanting to rush back to the tractor or get on bucking bales and things like that, they're going to migrate to a facility that can get them back into those institutions within a week's time versus 6 weeks, which would be like your traditional open cases. So we saw a lot of value in getting those type of metrics and improvements. And another thing I'm going to get, because we all know about the opiate issue that really is inflicted probably in all of our communities, but we came out of the gate really wanting to reduce the amount of opiates that were prescribed from our clinicians after surgery. So they were initially prescribing, a script of 30, and we put together different modalities that allowed for them to manage pain individualized with each person. But, they're down to 5 or 10 opiates per script now. And that was a huge win for us.
Alan, I'm going to turn to you as an executive leader. I would love to hear your perspective and for you to walk us through the process you took when evaluating the different modalities, robotics, traditional lap, open surgery. What insights have you gained as a result of that?
So I thank you, Molly. I've considered it a journey. When we started we went for a robotic center of excellence because I want to be the best at everything we do. I'm just a very competitive person in nature. We really spent a lot of time in the data. And when you look at data, you have to bring in people and walk through the data, make sure the data was accurate. So, we knew exactly our length of stay, the cost per case. We basically just went into like a data dump for 3 to 4 months. And that really helped us start to really understand and get the insight of why we wanted robotics. And we just started from a data perspective. And then it just spiraled from there and it became a lot of fun. And people really enjoyed looking at the difference in data and became like a competitive nature of the physicians and also the hospitals of who can drive the best KPIs. So I'm always a data guy. My entire career has been driven on data, and that's how we started our journey.
Jim, did that process look any different for you in any way or anything you would add from your experience?
No, the same thing. We kind of drive the same metrics along the way and value lap, the tradition open procedures, and kind of look at robotic as not just a service line. I know that's kind of something that people want to look at now, but we use it as another tool. It's just another piece of value added architecture to our surgical suite that we can offer our patients. But we've reduced the amount of lap cases that we've done, pretty much just emergent appendectomies now, and our conversion rate to open is very, very, very low, which was a good metric for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about process and evaluations, Jeff, let's check in with you next. When measuring downstream savings, what clinical outcomes have you really analyzed to truly understand the total cost of care and also potential savings generated by your robotic surgery service line? And is this information included to the board in your capital acquisition process?
So similar to the other guys here, we do look at data extensively. We'll look at, again, length of stay, readmission rates, surgical site infections. We've also started looking at not just margin per case, but margin per minute, right? And we'll take data from similar cases, different physicians, and compare their margin per minute. If they're running cases that are similar, but they're 20 or 30 minutes longer, we'll get them together and figure out is it a process issue? Are they doing something differently? So that really helps us kind of drive down the cost. As you know, physicians are competitive, so you start sharing data with them. They'll work to get to the bottom or the top, depending on how you measure it. So, and we do share that with our committee, our steering committee, and our board on terms of when we're looking to acquire a new robot. There's a whole list of quality indicators that we need to submit to them that compares robotic versus open versus laparoscopic to make sure we're making the right decision, not only financially but also for patient care.
And Jeff, for attendees with us today, any guidance or advice about elevating that information to the board level? Is there anything you would add for attendees to walk away with today? So at Common Spirit, we've got kind of a standardized form. I think if you can do that across, if you got multiple hospitals, so that way when they're looking at it, it's all in the same format, right? Versus everyone kind of submitting their own data.
we've actually got a standard template that we all complete. So that just helps tell the story, and that's what they're expecting to see. And then we'll layer in if there's anomalies, we can kind of explain that to them.
So Molly, this Alan, do you mind if I just jump in here real quick?
Go ahead, Alan.
We did the same thing for Jeff, but when you're working with your board, who our board is more of a governmental board that and they're not clinical. So what we actually did is we actually had them bring the robots to our board meeting, and we went over the entire analysis and why it brings value to the community and value. And then we actually had them go in the room and look at the robots and see the technology. And I think when boards are approving things, they get a lot of numbers. But if they visually see the robot and what it does, I think it brings a different flavor to the vote. So just as for the people out there listening, if you're worried about dealing with your board, that's a really good way. And the folks that will be more than happy to bring a robot over for you.
It's a great tactic and a great piece of advice, Alan. Thank you for chiming in there. Let's talk about some challenges with throughput, which we are consistently seeing across all different types of healthcare institutions. I'm curious how robotics has affected your throughput strategy. Alan, let me stay with you for this thought.
All right. Well, thank you. So specifically with COVID, when we were pretty much at the epicenter of COVID, we really were not doing overnight stays. So, but the surgical volume is the lifeline to our financials. So we had to think of creative ways to be able to get patients in and out on SSP cases or short stays. So we were able to convert a lot of our inpatient to outpatients. We were able to see phenomenal results. For example, in 2 years since we really focused on it, we reduced our length of stay by 4 days, and we're able to really drive a lot of robotic cases in. Throughput is everything in our business. Customer service, families are happy when things are moving quickly. So we look at it on a daily basis, and the robotics has really been able to really help us a lot in that. So we're very happy with the results.
And Kristen, can I check in with you next here about the link between robotics and throughput strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in listening to what my colleagues are sharing, specifically around data and the approach that's been taken in the inpatient environment, certainly the robotics industry, nascent stages, developed stages are in the inpatient environment. So a lot of that physician familiarity, physician comfort, Jim referenced the standard of care, that's really been established in the inpatient environment. As we're looking at the emerging outpatient market, I think the throughput strategy has been one where we've really had to think differently about what might be standard in the inpatient environment. So anesthesia, of course, comes to mind as we're looking at that transition in the outpatient environment from open or I would say traditionally minimally invasive surgeries. We've found that anesthesia requirements are slightly different in the robotics environment. And so ensuring that you're thinking about the end stage of your patient's care while they're in the surgery center. So specifically ensuring you don't have a PACU bottleneck, for example. That's really important. So again, going back to how do you build this program, starting with the end in mind, including patient satisfaction, physician satisfaction, and planning for each part of the patient's visit and the physician's experience, the surgeon's experience. It really has to be very well thought through, process mapped, and considered in perhaps a different frame than what makes sense in an inpatient environment.
Mm-hmm. In the outpatient environment, Chris, you mentioned building with the end result in mind. You strategically invested in your surgery centers to grow volume. Can you walk us through what you did to ensure incremental volume? And are there any other ancillary effects that came with implementing robotics in the ASC?
So I think, Alan really has said it, I think, very well. When you focus on quality first and we focus on the overall experience and the approach of bringing this service line to any environment, whether it's inpatient or outpatient, thinking about what does this mean to, again, my physician stakeholders. So does that mean we now have perhaps a flip room strategy if one physician is working on the robot, but then has a traditional non-hernia general case or a GYN case. So being very thoughtful about our physician partners and our approach to not just the robotics program, but really remaining physician focused on what does their practice need. And we haven't really touched on it too much, but really ensuring that we're helping to support our physicians in bringing that standard of care to the patient population in an in-network model, that still is relatively rare nationally. And so to provide for physicians to be able to offer their patients an in-network outpatient option is something that I think is going to be increasingly important. And one of the things that I think USPI does a really great job in is working with our health system partners and our physicians to support that approach.
Thank you, Kristen, for your thoughts there. Mm-hmm. Alan, I'm going to turn back to you because you had said something earlier. You said you love data. You are a data fiend, if you will. I'm curious to learn more about when it comes to assessing surgical performance. How has data really helped reduce the variation across surgeons? You mentioned they're very competitive, of course, and specialties to provide consistent cost of care.
Right. So I actually have a really funny story about that. I have a surgeon, which I will not name his name. He was on me when I first got it. We got to have a steering committee. We have to have a steering committee. And I said, okay, we'll do a steering committee. So I said, I'm going to get all the data. And he's like, I'm the best. I'm telling you, I'm the best at the robots. So we lined everybody up and we put the data up. And he actually ended up having the worst KPIs out of all the physicians when we blind searched him. So that steering, we got a lot of laughs out of that once we kind of walked him through that he was sort of at the back end of the pack over there. And interesting enough, now he's the number one surgeon with the KPIs. So we put the steering committee together. We looked at the data and we listened. I think in healthcare, we don't listen to each other. I know there's a lot of people have some crazy ideas, but if you just sit in a room and you listen, hey, this is how I do this surgery. This is how we do it here. We were able to really standardize the variations of care and provide a better care to the community and a better service to the community, which is, I think, our number one jobs as healthcare executives. So I would always suggest doing a robotic steering committee. It's really how you get on your pathway to be a robotic center of excellence, and just listen to bring in the OR techs that have to put the trays up and get it. Listen to them, listen to what they have to say, all the way up to the top surgeons. And I think you guys will all be in the right direction if you're looking for that center of excellence.
So you did a ranking, but do you share that data? Can surgeons access it to see how they or their colleagues are where they fall?
So we did a blind in the steering committee, but if they want to see, I don't want to embarrass anybody. So if they want to see where they stand, we could show them that, hey, you're 20 out of 20, or you're number 1 out of 20 in this KPI. And that way in the next meeting, they were able to say, hey, how did you guys how did you do this? And then the surgeon that has a really good process, well, then they'll have some discussion and we let them make the decisions instead of us as executives making the decisions for them. They buy into the decision, which then makes them want to do well on it. So that's sort of how we've been able to handle that at the district over here.
I think as Alan's story shows, when people are flying blind, they can have some beliefs about their own performance, their own costs, and so forth. What are your thoughts about sharing this data, using it to affect change with the surgeons?
I would say in general, we follow a very similar approach. I think that Alan brought up some really great time-tested philosophies. Number one, regarding buy-in, engagement. We all in this industry use data to drive our decisions ultimately, but it is that emotional engagement and that emotional connectivity to why is the data important and how does it ultimately serve to either improve the quality that I'm providing to my patient population, or make my center, my hospital, my facility more economically efficient. So I really agree with the approach that Alan described.
Well, let's wind down here before we get to our attendees' questions by talking about what's next. What do you see as the next step here? Looking to the future, what initiatives are you most focused to continue expanding minimally invasive surgery options for the communities that you serve? Alan, let's hear your thoughts first.
Well, thanks, Molly. One of the things that I love about this company is that we are, as healthcare executives, always trying to build strategic plans, and we got a lot going on. And what I love about this company, they have an ecosystem of strategies that are working all over the country. So I use my sales team and my clinical team as basically as part of my team. So when I go to look and say, what's next, I'm meeting with my guy on a quarterly basis. How do I build this program? How do I become best in class? And that they really do the strategy for me. So I'm not inventing the wheel. And I like that approach. And, they really bring the strategic side with the data and everything. And so it's a company that I really have invested in, and they've done a really great job for us. So I let them do the strategy, basically. I may disagree with some of the costs or something, but I let them kind of do the strategy for me.
Sure. And Jeff, how about for you, Dignity St. Joe's?
Yeah, so at this facility, we try to stay maybe one step ahead of the competition. So, we recently invested in the ION here to help grow our interventional pulmonology program. We have a large lung transplant program here. I don't see that going, but there's a lot of thoracic and esophageal surgeries that are transitioning over to robotics. So, it's really, part of it is driven by the community and what the community expects. And a lot of it is driven by our physicians. They'll see their partners starting to transition their cases over to robotic. They end up at my desk, saying, hey, we need a robot so I can, keep up. So really, it's kind of keeping your eyes looking forward and out into the community to see, what's transitioning and what do we need to do to invest to stay up with the times.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, let's get to our questions from attendees. I will pose these toward one of you, but by all means, co-panelists, feel free to weigh in as you see fit. The first question that came in is, are you seeing a shift in more patients seeking minimally invasive care options in your market? And how have you leveraged robotics as a market differentiator? Jim, can I turn to you for any initial thoughts here?
Yeah, Molly, thank you. I'd heard some comments from Alan, Kristen, both Jeff too, about retention of services there. And kind of, as I mentioned earlier, am I seeing more patients that are wanting to serve that? Yeah, I heard Alan say this about using your robotic platform and bringing your board in and taking the robot to them and getting excited. We kind of did the same thing. Where we brought the robotic platform in, but it wasn't only our board of directors and our foundation that was involved. We also had staff members that could walk through this meeting room and see it there. And I couldn't believe the number of people that were walking through going, hey, I'd had a procedure on that type of platform, at XY facility that they maybe it had another type of gyne procedure or another type of hernia repair at. So that told me the migration of those services out, and then the excitement that was existing within our stakeholders here about bringing that platform in. So yes, we definitely saw that initially as being a prime mover of why we wanted to have that platform availability in our communities, so people weren't driving an hour northwest or an hour northeast or southeast. That was the surrounding area for us. And we were seeing community members wanting to do that. We were predicting within 5 years it was going to be a continued erosion of our services that make our facility and its survivability very, very imperative.
Let's move on to the next question here. A service line approach has been referenced a lot so far. Can you provide reasoning into viewing it that way, and has that affected the way you look at the data? Kristen, let me turn to you for any thoughts here.
Sure. So I think when we're considering the outpatient service line approach, it does make sense to look at it as both the robotic service line and then perhaps the general surgery service line. I think all of us have experienced, if the physician has two cases and one of them is a robotics case, just by necessity, both of those cases are going to go to the location that has the robot. And so in thinking about a service line approach, having both, in this case, a general surgery service line or an GYN service line, makes sense to look at it both combined and separate to robotics. So on the one hand, you're able to really bifurcate out cost, especially on the robotic side, but then you're able to look at your clinical service program as a whole. I think that helps to really ensure that on the one hand, you're building a program that is economically viable and sustainable. But on the other hand, you're really developing a comprehensive approach that patients and physicians both can come and experience, again, that standard of care that's really becoming the norm.
Jeff, let's hear from you too on this one. The reasoning for viewing this as a service line.
So, I would almost think of it as a sub-service line within a service line. So, to look at it in those metrics, it gets cloudy if you're comparing robotic versus open, right? So by carving it out as its own sub-service line within a service line, you get a cleaner view of the data, and it's better when you're comparing it with similar like cases, kind of what we talked about earlier. When you're meeting with physicians, you can't compare a robotic case to an open case, right? The data just isn't going to match up. So really it's looking at that sub-service line level. And I think it also spans multiple service lines. So we can look at robotics as a service line and say, are we doing the right cases to maximize the return on our investment, right? Because there's lots of stuff you can do in the robot. Some of it is definitely more profitable than others. So trying to prioritize, if there's limited capacity on that robot, which cases do you want on there first? Which cases can we add on as capacity opens up? So I think you kind of look at it both ways.
Jim, anything you would add to this question from an attendee?
No, I think that's well stated by Jeff as well. It's something that we find is very important. I will add one thing, but when we talk about downstream effect, just let me add one thought. We knew this kind of going in, but the wear and tear on your general surgeons. When we all talk about throughput, especially in the competitive market with our payers, and the importance of having an increased throughput. I've seen this firsthand of the impact of standing at the table for long hours. And now when you can sit down comfortably at a console and have that, in our community, and I know for everybody, but when you're in a rural area, your physician recruitment is an incredibly precious resource. And when we get them to our area, we want to make sure that they can stay viable and certainly challenged clinically. And that's what I've seen as well, as it went off the chart for these guys of what they're able to do clinically at the table, but also the longevity of their bodies. If we're not standing at the table, you could sit comfortably at a console and do that has been a big plus.
It's such a good component too that we haven't really unearthed yet, but physician recruitment, physician satisfaction, retention. So thanks for bringing that up, Jim. Next question from an attendee. We hear a lot about the impact of per diem payments, but what data have you used to look at revenue, contribution margins, and profitability? Another data question here, Alan. Any initial thoughts from you?
Well, yeah, I look at all of it, every single month, every day. But one thing that I would like to just point out right now for all of you executives out there, we are seeing a significant increase in costs, the care model because of COVID, because we're having to pay a crazy amounts of money for nurses right now. So when you're looking at all these contribution margins and you're looking at your margins and your statistics, you need to make sure that you keep that in mind. So all of a sudden you don't look quarter over quarter that your total margins have gone. You really have to factor in the additional cost and normalize it so you can look at an apples to apples comparison. What you're trying to really look at in those comparisons is that there's not a creep up in incremental cost that is going to cut into your margins long term. So I just wanted to point that out to all the executives. I don't know if any of you guys are seeing that like in Florida, but we've seen a significant, we can't really even look at profitability ratios right now because of the COVID spike, and the cost care model has gone up so significantly.
Jeff, anything you would add out of Phoenix and Arizona, something similar to?
We're definitely seeing the same thing here in Phoenix, where just the cost of labor has really skyrocketed with COVID. I kind of mentioned earlier, when we're looking at costs, we're really going down to that per minute. Historically, it was always cost or margin per case, but we've actually gone down to margin per minute to really kind of drive efficiency and leverage that technology.
Our final question that we will get to and address today is from an attendee who would like to know, what key performance indicators have you found to be significant that perhaps you didn't really account for in the early stages of adoption? So noting that rear view and hindsight is 2020, anything that turned out to be quite more important than perhaps you had anticipated early on?
Yeah, I'll take that one real quick, Molly. So when we look at all the incremental volume and the cost you need to break even, what I now that I have a lot more experience is how many is that physician? So the physician that used to come and bring 50 cases a year, now that you have the robots, Now he's bringing 200 cases a year. I call him the Monday guy, the Tuesday guy, the Wednesday lady, the Thursday, whatever, and Friday guy. I bring them all in here, and they're bringing me all this additional volume that they may not have that brought because we didn't have the robot. So you don't really look at that one in the ROIs in the original, but that's an indicator I like to look at.
Any others worth noting before we wind down?
I think that's one thing, Molly, that I'll echo Alan's point is prior to robotics, our case volume was up 25%, but it's not all driven robotically. It kind of mixes in with others as well along the way. But the one thing so combined with that, Kristen has said something about PACU bottlenecks and things like that. That was the thing that really kind of caught us by surprise was reprocessing time and having those bottlenecks. So that's the thing that we're addressing right now as a brick and mortar project to kind of address some of those bottlenecks that'll kind of be relieved during that, and also help our reprocessing to give that more space that was kind of cramped before. But that was kind of a surprise for us.
Great point.
Well, Jim, Kristen, Alan, Jeff, I want to thank each of you for your thoughts today for this dynamic conversation exploring financial and clinical viability. Attendees, you will now have a quick break before we get to your next session. Please remember to complete the survey at the end of this session. We are constantly looking for ways to improve. The next session will start at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. Thank you for joining us.